Imagine for a second that you are handed a lantern to walk through this, pitch black forest.
Right. Okay.
You're told this lantern contains a brilliant, unquenchable fire. But there's a catch.
There usually is.
Yeah, exactly. The lantern is completely covered in a thick layer of unbaked clay. So you have to carry it, knowing the light is inside, and you can maybe feel a faint warmth, but you still cannot see the path directly in front of your feet.
Oh, wow. That is a striking image.
Right. And according to the mystics of the Carmelite tradition, this is exactly what it feels like to possess the theological virtue of faith.
Which is so contrary to what we usually expect.
It really is. I mean, when we think about the interior journey, we often expect a path that's just, well, bathed in clear and shadowed light.
Yeah, we want the floodlights on.
We do. But the deeper we go, the more we realize that our relationship with God is guided by something far more mysterious. So today, we are doing a deep dive into the spiritual teachings surrounding this mystery.
And we are anchoring our time together on the central doctrine found in Meditation 242, which is titled The Obscure Light of Faith.
Yes, the obscure light of faith. Our mission today is to uncover the mechanics of how faith actually operates in the soul, so that you can apply this wisdom to your own interior life.
And to start, we really have to establish that faith is not, it's not merely an intellectual agreement with a set of historical facts.
Right, it's way more than that.
Exactly. It is the very foundation of our relationship with God. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that faith is a habitual disposition of the soul.
A habitual disposition, meaning it's a constant state.
Yeah, it's a state by which eternal life actually begins in us. It's not just this, promise of future glory someday. It's the seed of eternal life planted in the soul right now.
Wow, right now.
Yes, it
Yeah.
literally elevates us to share in God's own knowledge of himself.
And that elevation of knowledge, I mean, that's a crucial distinction to make.
Yeah.
Because through human reason alone, we can look at the natural world, right?
Sure, the beauty of creation.
Yeah, like the precision of the stars or the complexity of biology, and we can logically deduce that a creator exists.
Right, reason gets us that far.
It even helps us deduce some of his perfections, like his infinite power. But human reason hits a definitive wall.
It absolutely does.
It just cannot possibly attain to the mystery of God's intimate interior life. I mean, reason alone could never deduce the mystery of the Holy Trinity.
No, never. Or the reality of sanctifying grace, for that matter.
Right. And maybe we should clarify what we actually mean by sanctifying grace here, since it's so central to this doctrine.
We definitely should. So sanctifying grace is not merely God looking favorably down upon us from heaven.
It's not just a gold star.
No, not at all. It is a literal participation in the divine nature. It is God sharing his own inner life with the human soul, transforming it entirely from within.
Which is just incredible to think about.
It is, and only divine revelation allows us to know that this transformation is even possible. I mean, this is exactly why the author of the letter to the Hebrews writes in chapter 11, verse 6, that without faith, it is impossible to please God.
Because faith provides that supernatural light.
Yes, the light that is absolutely necessary to perceive truths that belong exclusively to the mind of God.
To visualize how the supernatural light interacts with our human limitations, I always think of the analogy of standing behind a heavily frosted pane of glass.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because the sun is on the other side, you can feel its heat radiating through the glass, and you can see this bright, diffuse glow illuminating the room.
But you can't see the crisp details.
Exactly. You cannot see the landscape outside,
Right.
and you cannot define the exact shape of the sun. So faith gives us the reality of God.
Right.
It transmits his warmth and his presence, but it does not yet grant us the full, unveiled vision of his face. We possess the reality, but we lack the visual clarity.
That tension is perfectly illustrated in the Carmelite tradition, actually. St. John of the Cross talks about this in his work, The Ascent of Mount Carmel.
Oh, what does he say about it?
Well, he offers this brilliant comparison. He compares faith to the clay pitchers used by Gideon's soldiers in the Old Testament.
Oh, the story with the torches.
Right. Those soldiers went into battle carrying clay pitchers that completely concealed lighted lamps inside them. So in the darkness of the night, the light was entirely hidden.
Until they broke them.
Exactly. It was only when the soldiers smashed the clay pitchers that the glorious light shone forth and routed the enemy. St. John of the Cross tells us that faith is exactly like those clay pitchers.
It contains the divine light within itself, but it's hidden.
Yes. It is only when the clay pitcher of this mortal life is finally broken at the moment of our passing, that the glorious light of the divinity will shine forth clearly.
The light we were carrying all along.
Precisely. That breaking of the picture ushers the soul into the beatific vision, which is the eternal, direct, face-to-face vision of God in heaven.
But, I mean, practically speaking, carrying a concealed lamp inside a clay pitcher means that down here, we are still basically stumbling in the dark.
Yeah, it's true. We
We
are.
are carrying the light, but we cannot use its full brilliance to navigate the terrain. Which brings up a big question.
What's that?
If God ardently desires us to know him, why does he use a clay pitcher at all? I mean, why not just give the soul a clear, unobstructed flashlight?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. Why does faith require this leap in the dark that feels so entirely repugnant to our human nature? Because, let's be honest, our human nature desperately wants to be in control.
And control requires concrete, visible evidence.
Exactly. We want to see the path.
Well, to understand why God ordains this obscurity, we have to look closely at the mechanics of human knowledge. We really have to contrast natural truth with divine truth.
Okay, lay that out for us.
So consider a natural truth, like the mathematical equation, 2 + 2 = 4.
Right, basic math.
Your intellect does not require the cooperation of your will to believe that equation. The truth is self-evident. Your intellect simply sees the proof and accepts it automatically.
I don't have to choose to believe it. It just is.
Exactly. But divine truths, the inner mysteries of God, they are not visible or evident to the human intellect like that. They completely transcend our natural capacity.
Because we don't have the natural senses for them.
Right. And because the visual or logical evidence is lacking to our natural reasoning, the intellect remains free. It is not forced to assent the way it is with math.
So the intellect just kind of sits there.
Yeah, so the will has to step in. A free, upright will that loves God must actually command the intellect to believe.
Commanded based on what?
Based entirely on the infallible word of God, who can neither deceive nor be deceived.
Wait, I need to challenge this mechanism a bit because if my intellect cannot see the evidence, how can my will simply command it to believe?
It sounds difficult, I know.
It sounds dangerously close to blind self-deception, or even brainwashing, to a modern ear. I mean, how is an act of the will different from just pretending to know something?
That is such a vital challenge, and the distinction really lies in the foundation of our trust. It is not brainwashing at all. It's a calculated, rational submission to a higher authority.
Okay, give me an example.
Think of a trained pilot flying a plane into a dense, severe cloud bank. Suddenly, the pilot loses all visual reference to the horizon.
The fog is everywhere.
Right. And because of the gravitational forces, the pilot's inner ear, his natural senses, might actually scream at him that the plane is flying completely upside down.
So his physical senses are totally disoriented.
Exactly. His intellect, relying on that sensory evidence, is terrified. But the pilot has a dashboard of highly calibrated instruments in front of him.
I see where you're going with this.
The pilot must use his will to command his intellect to reject those flawed human senses and trust the instruments.
Because he knows the instruments are true, even if he feels differently.
Yes. He chooses to fly by the instruments because he trusts the authority of their calibration way more than he trusts his own temporary feelings.
That reframes the struggle entirely.
In the spiritual life, God's revelation is the instrument panel. The will commands the intellect to trust the authority of God, even when our spiritual senses are completely disoriented in the fog.
And that explains why this obscurity, which, let's face it, feels so agonizing sometimes, is actually glorious.
It's what makes it beautiful.
Yeah, it is precisely what constitutes the merit of faith. If we could see God clearly, if the truth were as mathematically forced upon us as 2 + 2 = 4, there would be no merit in believing.
Because there'd be no choice.
Exactly. The obscurity allows us to give supreme honor to God by relying on his word alone, rather than demanding that he, shrink down to the size of our limited comprehension.
And we see this lived out heroically in the life of Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus.
Oh, her dark night of the soul.
Yes. During the final year of her life, she endured these bitter, dark trials against faith. Heaven seemed completely closed to her.
She said it felt like a thick wall, right?
She did. She felt absolutely no sensible consolation or spiritual joy. Her intellect and emotions were entirely in the fog.
Just flying blind.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yet, she noted that she made more deliberate acts of faith during that year of darkness than at any other time in her entire life.
Wow.
She demonstrated that doubts are just a natural, involuntary reaction of the human intellect to what it cannot see. But those doubts are overcome by a firm, determined act of the will.
Which means an act of faith is not this warm, emotional feeling we're waiting for.
Not at all.
It is a cold, calculated choice. It is the soul standing in the pitch black and declaring, I choose to believe because you have spoken, Lord, and I trust your character.
Beautifully put.
If faith is this deliberate choice exercised in the dark, what happens when that choice is violently tested? I mean, what happens when a soul in the dark suddenly walks face first into an immovable mountain?
Well, that brings us to a really profound law of the spiritual life. Because faith is an act of the will exercised in obscurity, it is not just a passive static state.
It's active.
Incredibly active. It becomes this powerful force precisely when it is tested by life's mountains. The doctrine reveals that God's omnipotence actually requires our faith to act.
He needs us to make the first move, in a way.
Yes, we see this established throughout the Gospels. Before Jesus performed a miracle, he consistently asked for an act of faith.
Like with the blind men or Jairus.
Exactly. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verse 23, he tells the desperate father, all things are possible to him that believeth.
And then there's the famous mustard seed passage.
Right. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, verse 19, he speaks of faith the size of a mustard seed being able to move mountains. He establishes our active, willing faith as the indispensable condition to benefit from his divine power.
The reality, though, is that when we face insurmountable difficulties, whether they are stubborn spiritual faults we can't seem to overcome, or crushing duties that just completely surpass our physical strength.
It gets overwhelming fast.
It does. Our immediate human tendency is deep discouragement. We look at our past string of failures, we look at this towering obstacle in front of us, and we just conclude that victory is impossible.
The emotional exhaustion just takes over completely.
Yeah. But the Carmelite perspective proposes this radical shift in how we view our own weakness. I mean, what if we view our absolute powerlessness not as a brick wall that stops us, but as a springboard?
Using powerlessness as a springboard is truly a hallmark of spiritual maturity.
It turns the whole thing upside down.
It really does. God sometimes permits us to find ourselves in agonizing situations that simply cannot be solved by human means.
He lets us hit rock bottom.
Yes, he permits painful spiritual trials and states of real anguish for the sole purpose of forcing us to practice heroic faith. He does not abandon us in those moments.
It just feels like...
Right. Rather, he withdraws sensible help to make the muscles of our will grow stronger. Saint Teresa of Jesus observed the mechanics of this trial brilliantly.
What did she say?
She noted that when grave difficulties appear, the devil actually rejoices.
Oh, because he thinks he's won?
Exactly. The enemy hopes for no other reason than to weaken our faith and persuade us that God is either not powerful enough or not loving enough to help us.
The classic lie.
Yes. But a soul that understands the ways of God uses that very impotence to say, Lord, I have no strength left, which means this is the perfect moment for your omnipotence.
I firmly believe that you can do what you will.
Exactly.
So the mechanism of heroic faith is actually triggered by our total inability to fix the problem ourselves.
Yes, our emptiness makes room for his power.
That is such a powerful framework for major spiritual crises. But let's bring this profound theology down to the reality of, say, an ordinary Tuesday afternoon.
The real test.
Right. How do we actively hold this hidden lamp aloft? Like Jesus commands in Matthew chapter 5, verse 15, when we are dealing with the mundane irritations of life.
Because those happen every day.
Exactly. How do you practice the obscure light of faith when you are dealing with a deeply tiresome coworker, or a completely ruined schedule, or just a sudden frustrating illness?
It's so easy to lose our peace in those moments.
It is. How do we see God in the annoyance without accidentally accusing him of being the author of our frustration?
This is exactly where the doctrine of faith has to penetrate our daily actions. The practical application here requires learning to pass over what theologians call secondary causes.
Okay, secondary causes.
Yes, passing over them in order to reach the first cause, which is God's active providence.
Can you break that down? What is a secondary cause?
The secondary cause is the immediate visible source of your frustration. So the annoying person, the terrible weather, the sudden disruption of your plans.
The thing right in front of my face.
Right. And our natural fallen instinct is to stop right there at the secondary cause. We fixate on it, and we lose our peace in protests, complaints, and endless human reasoning about how unfair it all is.
Oh, I've definitely been there.
We all have.
Right.
But the gaze of faith passes over the creature and the event to reach God, who by his providence rules and orders everything for his own holy ends.
You know, I think we need a concrete analogy to explain the mechanics of the first and secondary causes here.
I agree. What do you have in mind?
Well, it is very much like receiving a tax bill in the mail.
Okay.
If you are angry about the bill, it makes absolutely no sense to yell at the mailman. I mean, the mailman is just the secondary cause, right? He's merely the courier.
He didn't write the bill.
Exactly. If you want to address the issue, you have to look at the government, which is the first cause, who authorized the bill in the first place. So in the spiritual life, the annoying coworker or the delayed flight is just the mailman.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. The mailman analogy works perfectly. However, we must be very, very careful to maintain orthodox clarity here.
Right, because we can't say God causes bad things.
Exactly. God is never the author of sin or malice. He does not cause the coworker to act maliciously.
Free will is still real.
Yes. But God does permit the errors, the injustices, and the malice of men, and he permits them specifically for the exercise of our virtue and for our sanctification.
So he uses their free choices for our good.
Precisely. God uses that delayed flight or that unjust criticism as a custom-designed workout for your soul.
A custom-designed workout, I love that.
If we judge these daily irritations from a purely human point of view, we just rebel and we suffer pointlessly. But if our will commands our intellect to raise our eyes to the first cause, we remember the promise of the Apostle Paul.
In Romans chapter 8, verse 28.
Yes, to them that love God, all things work together unto good.
It really brings to mind the striking perspective of Blessed Elizabeth of the Trinity.
Oh, her writings are so beautiful on this.
They really are. She lived her entirely hidden life by this comprehensive gaze of faith. She famously stated that everything that happens, every interruption, every pain, every single joy, is a direct message of God's great love for her soul.
Every single thing.
Yeah. Imagine how transformative it would be to adopt that specific gaze in your own home or your workplace. When you are treated unjustly, instead of stopping at the secondary cause and feeling your blood pressure rise in resentment.
Yelling at the mailman.
Right. Instead of doing that, you look at the hidden reality. You recognize that God's paternal hand is permitting this exact uncomfortable circumstance to spur you on to patience and sanctity.
It changes everything.
It does. It does not mean you don't feel the sting of the annoyance, obviously.
Yeah.
The natural pain is very real. But your will embraces the hidden lamp of God's providence operating within the clay pitcher of that difficult moment.
And living with that comprehensive gaze is the true life of faith. We are constantly navigating between the material, visible reality of the events around us and their absolute invisible dependence on God.
It's a dual vision.
It is. It requires a relentless discipline of the will to continually pass through the frosted glass of this world to acknowledge the warmth of the sun on the other side.
We have journeyed today through the profound mechanics of belief. We started by understanding faith as a supernatural elevation of our intellect.
A participation in God's own inner life.
Exactly, a reality that reason alone could never reach. And we explored the difficult but glorious mechanism of the will, which must boldly choose to trust the infallible dashboard of God's Word when our spiritual senses are just completely lost in the fog.
Flying by instruments.
Yeah. We recognized how acknowledging our own absolute powerlessness actually arms us with the mustard seed of power when facing life's immovable mountains.
The springboard.
Right. And finally, we examined how this majestic theology translates into the living, daily practice of looking past the mailmen of our secondary causes, just so we can see the loving, providential hand of God behind every earthly event.
As we conclude our reflection, there is a final, very provocative thought offered by the Carmelite mystic Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi.
Oh, what'd she say?
She observed that when we truly consider the reality of God's immense love, his boundless goodness, and his sheer omnipotence, it actually requires more effort and more blind faith to not believe in him than it does to simply surrender to his love.
Wow, that is profound. It takes more faith to disbelieve.
It really does. We only have this very short, fleeting earthly life in which to offer God the beautiful, meritorious gift of believing in the dark.
Because the darkness won't last forever.
Exactly. Once the clay pitcher breaks and we enter heaven, faith will completely dissolve into clear vision. So now is our only opportunity to prove our love by serving him in the obscurity of night.
We invite you to take these reflections deeply into your own mental prayer today. Ask God to increase your faith so that this obscure but glorious light may illuminate every single corner of your interior house. May you be granted the grace to hold that light aloft, trusting completely and quietly in the one who dwells in the darkness of the clay pitcher.